Speaking a foreign language always lags behind reading, writing, and listening. And it makes sense, right? Sometimes you'll spend more time finding language partners than actually speaking with them. You have to browse profiles, message tens if not hundreds of people, and then hope a few turn into conversations. But these conversations are usually exchanges, meaning you only practice speaking your target language 50% of the time. My dear listeners, I have good news for you. Fluentel is a new service in the practice speaking your target language space. When you sign up at fluen.tel, that's fluen.tel, T-E-L, as in telephone, they'll text you a dial-in number. You call the number, they find you a language partner, and all of a sudden, you're speaking your target language with a native speaker. No app to install, no profiles to search through, no messaging someone, hey, are you free to chat? Nobody sending you flirty messages, and you don't swap roles mid-call, so you get to practice your target language 100% of the time. If you want to speak fluently, you have to sign up today with Fluentel. Again, the website is fluen.tel. Sign up today, and your first 20 minutes to practice speaking are free. Welcome to the Foreigner and Friends podcast. This is a show about language learning. We promote fluency through speaking, teach you how to reason about language, and tell the stories of language learners from all over the world. I'm your host, Aaron Kelton, and today we have Paisley from the podcast Learn German Through Music. It's good to speak with you. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself and how Learn German Through Music came to be?
Okay, well, honestly, my interest in Germany and the German language started very young, before I was actually even old enough to understand that I would have any kind of interest in German or Germany. My father received a Fulbright scholarship, if you're familiar with the Fulbright program. And so as an infant, I actually went over to Germany with my family for about a year and a half. My father taught at a university there. And I remembered, unfortunately, nothing of the experience because I was so young. But of course, coming home, my father would always kind of talk about it, and there was always the language in the house one way or the other. Typically, it would be him listening to audio recordings of the news from Germany. And I had a number of, toys and books and other things from Germany that I grew up with. So there was always kind of that interest in seeing where I had lived and this country that had, contributed a lot to my childhood. From what I understand, some of my first words were actually German. However, for one reason or the other, my father never kept up with the language with me when we returned to the United States. So it was always kind of something I wanted to always go back and see the place. And in the beginning, I didn't really necessarily have that much interest in learning the language, but as I became older and I started to get into music, and some of the music that was very popular with my friends and I happened to include some German bands. The big one at the time was Einstürzende Neubauten, if you're familiar with them at all.
I haven't heard of them. Only Rammstein was popular when I was growing up.
Well, I'm at least a generation ahead of you, and our generation's Rammstein was Einstürzende Neubauten, and that's an industrial band. They originate out of Berlin, and they used to actually tour in the United States. So sort of my first interest in actually learning the language came from wanting to understand the lyrics to these songs. And as I got more into trying to self-study with the language and learn these songs, I came to connect with people who then introduced me to other German language bands. And I mean, really, my interest in learning the language itself came just as much from enjoying the music and wanting to understand the music and the lyrics as it did from, just the influence of my family.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Did you grow up, or did you spend time over there with your father on the east side or west side?
We were in the north and the west in Hagen, Germany, where I believe Nina Hagen gets her name from, the song 99 Luftballons. So, okay. So, yeah. I think she just goes by Nina now. She does still make music all these years later. But, yeah, that's where we were. And when I returned on my own, I actually spent a year in Munich, in the area around Munich.
Okay, nice. When did you go over to Munich?
That would have been in the mid-90s, when I was in school, when I was in college, and I did an academic year abroad in Munich.
Oh, cool. Was that something that was like part of your major, like a little study abroad?
Yeah, I ended up actually majoring in German because I enjoyed the language so much. And I also couldn't think of a major that really grabbed me as much as German. So it was sort of something that I wanted to do for my major. I know not everybody who majors in a language studies abroad, but it's something that I felt was important to be able to actually, be good at the language.
Right. It's interesting. So I minored in German, and I think the only phrase I remember is Deutsch war mein Nebenfach. So I can tell people German was my minor.
Yeah.
But I've forgotten more than I learned. Did you focus on the language itself, or were you maybe interested in like one of the electives I took for my minor was like the mythology. So it was, learning all about German mythology. What was kind of your focus?
It was really, our program did not focus very much on culture at all, so the main focus was on the language itself. I mean, for my capstone project, I did a paper about a German artist, Friedrich David Caspar. I'm probably getting his name wrong there. He was a romantic artist, a German romantic artist.
Okay.
Caspar David Friedrich. This, of course, I was getting it wrong. I had it absolutely backwards.
Okay, nice. Caspar David Friedrich.
So, I think one of the more famous paintings he did was of a man standing on a cliff looking out on sort of the North Sea.
Oh.
As there's a storm in the North Sea, and I think anybody who's ever looked at the philosophy section in a bookstore has seen that on the front of a Nietzsche book.
Yes.
It almost always seems to be the picture they use for every single Nietzsche book.
Yeah, and he's like standing with a cane, I think, or something, and you can see his back.
Yes, exactly. See? Yes, exactly. That one.
Very popular.
So,
oh, cool.
very well-known image. So I did a capstone project on him, his work, his life.
Ah, that's so cool. Did you study abroad more towards the beginning or towards the end of your major?
I actually studied abroad several times, but that academic year abroad was my junior year.
Okay. The reason I ask, so this being a podcast about language learning, did you have many opportunities to practice speaking? And when you got over to Germany, because I assume the last time you had been there, you were an infant, you didn't have any memory of that. Was it kind of like,
Yeah.
hey, I'm a German major, I'm feeling very confident about my trip over here, the time I'm going to be spending, but then you get there and it's like, whoa, I haven't spoken to native German speakers, and everything's fast and dialects and everything. How did that hit you?
Well, that's interesting. I did do a 1-month summer program between my freshman and sophomore years in Tübingen, Germany, and that was enormously helpful for the language. And I did, ahead of my semester at the university, I did an intensive semester at a Goethe Institute, so it was just learning German the whole time. Despite all that preparation and despite having achieved I tested a B2 at the end of that course, and then we did another intensive prep course before the semester at the university started. To be honest, the first week or two of the official semester at the university was extremely challenging. And I just took copious notes. I wrote down a lot of notes, and anything I didn't understand, I just had to look up after a class and sort of go over my notes and, oh, okay, that's what he said. After that first 2 weeks of the semester, then I felt a lot more confident understanding everything. But yes, it was absolutely very challenging in the beginning, even with all the, years and preparation and speaking with other people.
Wow.
So,
wow.
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough once you get into that, real life language environment.
Yeah. Okay. Man, thank you for sharing that. So B2 at the time, have you at least maintained that, or have you gone beyond a B2 in your German skills?
That's kind of an interesting question, because for a long time after graduation, I really fell out of using the language very much. And I feel like I did backslide for sure in some ways. Although I did resume self-study after a while, so I kind of feel like unofficially I'm probably at a C1 now, but I think when at the moment I had realized that I'd really let myself go with the language, I definitely slipped back to at least a B1.
Okay.
I just really would, and it was funny, the only German that I could still understand, and I'm talking about almost at least a 10 to 15 year gap there, the only German I could still understand after that time period where I just really let it go was the German words in the songs that I still listen to on a regular basis.
Okay, yeah.
And, that's kind of part of why I feel so strongly about the use of music in language learning, because I would still listen to these bands and these songs without any intention of engaging with the language. I was just listening to it because I like the music and it's on my iPod and it plays in a regular rotation with everything else I listen to.
Right.
So I realized that had really sort of saved me from slipping back and losing even more of the language, I feel. So then, when I decided to really try to regain the language in earnest, I obviously went beyond just using music for that, using reading and speaking, using apps like Tandem, and watching news programs and that kind of thing, sort of got me back to where I was initially.
Okay.
With the language. And I definitely, feel like I'm much more confident in the language than I was even after the end of my semester at the university.
Oh, wow. Nice. So
yeah, that's kind of...
yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of that music, those songs were a real lifeline to the language, and, that's why kind of part of the inspiration for the podcast.
Okay. So it sounds like the music is very motivating. I've, in past interviews and conversations with people, language learners, as long as they're motivated and interested in what they're doing, I think they can apply the language learning to that. And it sounds like you had to create a sort of mini immersion environment of your own with the reading, watching German things, and also speaking like on Tandem. Was Tandem your only outlet? Because I think that app has only been around for a few years, or did you use any other websites before, or any in-person German sort of meetups where you might have been at the time?
Mostly before Tandem, and I honestly have had difficulty finding good partners on Tandem because it's unfortunately rife with a lot of scammers. So it can be a bit of a minefield trying to find a good language partner on Tandem. I had a lot more luck with using Meetup.
Okay.
Meetup.com, if you're familiar with the website. Just to meet with people either in person or online, in Zoom groups and that kind of thing to actually get speaking practice. But that is the one thing living here and choosing a language like German that's not very common in the United States. That's always a big challenge.
Yeah.
So most of my actual speaking practice has been, before Zoom there was Skype, so talking to people that I went to school with in Germany over Skype.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, Skype to the rescue. That's a tried and true.
Yeah, Skype to the rescue for sure.
Tried and true form. That's awesome. I spoke with someone, an American living down in... he was in Ecuador, and he uses Skype, and he routes his American number to Skype. So yeah, Skype is still definitely here with us, even though we have Zoom and Riverside, obviously, and all these tools. Skype is tried and true.
Right. Yeah, it's gotten so much better. I graduated in 2000, and when I was learning German at the time, all these online resources that are so wonderful now just didn't really exist. A few were starting up, but even just finding anything in German online was a challenge.
Yeah.
So Spanish speakers are very fortunate in this country that they have a lot of places where they can go use that right here at home.
That's right.
So, and yeah, but we're very lucky that the internet has, provided so many wonderful language resources. There's just more than I can even keep track of now, and they're fantastic, a lot of them.
Yeah, the entire industry is it's a very large, growing industry. Kind of been upsetted by Duolingo when Rosetta Stone was kind of the big player. It's just fragmented with a lot of offerings, is I guess what I've observed.
Yeah, and it's that's not necessarily a bad thing, but I just kind of wonder for people who are sort of self-taught entirely without having the benefit of formal classes and formal instruction, that it must be a bit of a minefield trying to find good resources.
Right.
I use, just for example, another language that I studied and still kind of dabble with occasionally is Arabic.
Okay.
And I've noticed that even on Duolingo, there are a lot of mistakes in the Arabic category. I'm like, wow, with 2 semesters of Arabic, if I'm noticing mistakes, then
right.
No. Somebody who's never worked with the language at all must be very confused.
Yeah.
At this point, if they're using Duolingo to try to learn Arabic.
Yeah. Wow.
So.
Okay, that's a good warning on that front, and also on Tandem. So let's get into the podcast a little bit. The Learn German through music. How did you get the idea? Were there earlier, trials at doing something like this? Because from what I've seen, the way you're doing it, it's really become available. You've had the opportunity to do it because of Spotify and Anchor. So can you tell us about the podcast?
I mean, honestly, I never had any intention of starting a podcast ever in my entire life. And I'm still not sure why I'm doing it. It is enjoyable, though, and really, I mean, it's as simple as I was driving along one day listening to music on Spotify, and the Anchor app ad came on, and I thought, huh. And then the idea came to me, I, love German music, and I love talking about it, and wouldn't it be fun to do something with this in German music? And it just seemed like the most obvious thing because, I used to, before I took classes in the language, I used to sit down with a dictionary and the lyrics to a song and just translate them myself, which I know, I'm certainly not the only one who's done that. But of course, some of the more enjoyable classes that I've taken were classes where the teacher said, okay, today we're just going to listen to music, we're going to translate the song together, and, just kind of get away from the typical, less exciting lecture.
Yeah.
And I thought, wouldn't that be a fun thing for people to have as a resource? Reading up about it, and I've done some bonus episodes on this. Not all teachers do this, and they have some difficulty finding good songs and good resources for a variety of reasons. One particular challenge is that, especially through the K through 12 level, you have to be very careful about the content of music. And so they, tend to avoid certain musicians. If they're not a music fan themselves, they might not know what's out there. Yeah. They might not know what's appropriate to play in a classroom setting. So part of the intention of this is to provide a resource. It's like, I've already translated this song. You can see if it has appropriate lyrics. You can see if it has any other cultural relevance beyond just being a song from that culture. And then maybe incorporate it into a class. But of course, for people who are language learners and have an interest in music and they want to explore different bands, they can kind of jump around from episode to episode. I say what genre the music is. So they can look and they're like, oh, I like reggae. Oh, here's a German reggae band. Let's try that out. And hopefully they'll continue to listen to the band and do some self-study on their own. And just, I guess half of it for me is teaching the language, and then half of it for me is just kind of getting these bands out there. So that more people know about them. Because I meet people on occasion, and, they may know one or two bands, but they don't know anything else.
Right.
So I just think it'd be nice for there to be a resource out there for people who, want to learn more about, the German music industry. And hopefully I'm providing them with that.
Yeah, that's so cool. So you've got this idea because Spotify and Anchor have made it easy to do so. Is the motivation for the podcast, is it purely, creative? You're like recreating that environment and that experience that you had when you were learning German, and the teacher would say, hey, let's translate this song. And also, like, where do you see the podcast going in the future? Do you want to keep doing what you're doing, or are there ideas for like different ways to, provide an offering, I guess, or an experience for your listeners?
Well, I don't see it changing very much from where it is now, although I do want to kind of make minor adjustments. One of the episodes that's going to be featured in a couple of months that I'm working on now, I found actually a clip of the musician explaining the song. So I'm going to incorporate that into an episode. So that's going to be interesting, I think. To be honest, I walked into this with no concrete plans of what it would look like or why I was doing it. And I think as long as I'm enjoying it, and as long as other people are enjoying it, I'm going to keep doing it. And I don't have a concrete plan, but as ideas come to me, like, obviously I do a lot of vocabulary review on Twitter. And I've kind of changed the way I do the vocabulary review. At first I was just kind of posting, the vocabulary words used in each lesson. Now I've changed that to more of an interactive format. I'm trying to encourage people to actually answer questions about the vocabulary featured in each episode. There's no particular direction or format that I have in mind. It's kind of just to see what works, and if I feel something isn't working, then make an adjustment, and if something comes along that I think would be a good idea, I'll at least try it out.
Yeah.
I've done a couple of interviews, and not that I ever envisioned doing interviews on the show, but so far they've been kind of interesting and they've gotten a good response, so I'd like to continue doing them.
Nice. And we'll mention it in the show notes and then at the end of the episode as well, but the Twitter handle is at German thru music, where thru is spelled THRU.
Yes. And
do you use any like Twitter polls for people to answer to give you feedback that way?
I do. I did one recently because I did do one grammar-related episode. It's a video episode that talks about the different rules for remembering der, die, das, the gender articles associated with nouns, which is one of the biggest challenges for German learners.
Yeah.
And that one has been incredibly popular, so I did do a poll and, ask, hey, do you want more of this type of content? And it would appear that people do, so I'm going to have to come up with something else and, when I can, try to incorporate another grammar lesson into the podcast as a bonus episode.
Right. Okay. And I assume people learn German from all over, but you're producing this in English, so they at least have to listen to, know some English, I guess, to listen along. Do you find your audience from any particular, region, or what are you finding out there?
Actually, there are people listening from all over the world, which is really interesting. The majority of listeners are in the United States. The second largest group are actually from Germany. And then it's Canada. Actually, let me look and see. It's Canada, the United Kingdom, but I also have a lot of listeners from Mexico, from Chile. Just trying to look at that analytics.
And you're seeing those in Anchor, I guess,
provides that.
Switzerland,
Brazil, Brazil, India. And that's really neat to see where people are tuning in from. I feel kind of bad that I'm not able to really offer it in more languages, and I can't really come up with a way to offer it purely in German. So unfortunately, it does depend on people knowing English ahead of time to be able to get a benefit out of the podcast. Although we did recently have an episode that was German, Ukrainian, and English.
Yeah,
so
listen to that one.
And I would love to do more things like that. If anybody has an interest in another language and would like to, work with me on an episode that incorporates other languages in English, I'd love that.
Okay, great, cool.
Yeah.
That we'll see if you can get that and expand it out. When did you start this? Because I'm kind of curious how long you've been doing it, and then on the back end of that question is what has been the most surprising thing for you?
I started doing it in January, and I mean, honestly, the most surprising thing has just been the response.
Yeah.
I started it in January with the idea that I might do 1 or 2 episodes, and then probably no one would be listening anyway, so then I'll just give it up. And, I mean, I've been just completely overwhelmed and completely flattered by the number of people who are listening. And so I guess I'm tapping into something people want.
Yeah.
And I'm glad I'm glad I have, and
Cool.
Yeah, some of the interaction on Twitter is wonderful. You know, just getting so many people responding and interacting with the Twitter post, and yeah, so it's been great.
Okay, nice. If there was one language, you said you were learning Arabic earlier as well. If there was one language that you have never picked up, but you suddenly had an extra hour a day, what would it be and why?
Well, I do have an interest in Afrikaans, mostly just because I really find that region of Africa very interesting, and the history of South Africa and Namibia are very interesting and surprisingly not unrelated to German history. Right. I'm not sure if not many people here in the United States, I think, know this, but Germany actually had a colony in Africa. Right. And it's they did not have much colonial involvement in Africa, but they did have a colony in South and West Africa. And so that region's very interesting to me, and Afrikaans happening to be so close to Dutch, which is so close to German, I can already kind of understand bits and pieces, mostly written, and it's a language that I think would be interesting. I'd love to explore more, and maybe, someday go to South Africa and, kind of see everything. I think that's definitely a bucket list trip, going to South Africa.
Nice. If you had never gotten into the German language like you did, what might you have missed out on in life?
I think I would have missed out on a great deal. I would have missed out on travel, I think. Not that I wasn't interested in travel, but had it not been for the fact that I had actually traveled previously, I don't think I would have seen myself as a quote-unquote traveler, if that makes sense. And I think that's something that's true of a lot of people in America, that we don't necessarily view ourselves as international travelers. And therefore, so few people ever actually go abroad. So I'm not sure what I would have done. And I think I would have, I obviously would have missed out on a lot of really wonderful music, and just sort of seeing the world, and especially seeing this country through someone else's eyes. It's always interesting. I watch a lot of comedy shows, sort of political comedy shows from Germany, and when they do discuss the United States, it's always kind of interesting to see how they see us, and to consider that point of view, and to sort of, also just to see. And especially having been overseas, and I did actually live in the United Kingdom for quite a few years, so I do have that experience of actually living as an expat, just to see how things can be done differently.
Yeah.
And not necessarily, always politically or societal, but just any simple thing. So I think I would have missed out very much on that. I think that my worldview would be much narrower today if I had not engaged with the language and gotten that interest in confidence to travel.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Thank you for sharing that. And I guess for anybody that might be starting learning German, traveling, I think aren't Germans like one of the most widely traveled populations around the world? So if you're traveling anywhere, there's a good chance you'll bump into a German speaker. Or at least I've experienced that. And then if there was any like parting advice that you could leave for language learners, whether they're learning German or Spanish, Italian, any language out there, from your own experience, what advice would you give that adult language learner really?
I would say to diversify the sources that you use to engage with the language. You want to keep it enjoyable, so you shouldn't always just be book learning. Obviously, book learning is very important, and going through the vocabulary memorization and learning the grammar rules, those are all very important. But to really cement that language in your mind, you do need to do other things, whether that be, talking with other people, whether that be listening to music or watching movies or reading books. Just diversify the different ways you engage with the language. And I think any seasoned language learner knows that, understanding a language is the easiest thing. Being able to read in that language is the next easiest thing. And then speaking in the language is the most challenging thing. So you need to try to accomplish all of these things in the language learning process to really be as successful as possible.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. Well, this concludes another episode of Foreigner and Friends. Again, you can listen to Paisley and her podcast, Learn German Through Music. I believe it's only available on Spotify. Is that right, Paisley?
That's right. Some of the bonus content is available on Google Podcasts and on Podpage, but unfortunately, because of the way the music and talk episodes work on Anchor, that is only available through Spotify, because what happens during the program is the actual music tracks that the bands themselves or their music companies have uploaded onto Spotify, that is what plays in the middle of my episodes. So obviously that's only available on Spotify. So,
right.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's unfortunate, and it is limiting in terms of growing an audience, but I think the nice thing about this is, at the very least, the band's getting 3 plays per song per episode of my podcast.
Yeah.
So I hope in some way that's benefiting them as well.
Right. Excellent. And then you can also reach out to Paisley and the Learn German Through Music podcast on Twitter, and that's at German Through Music. And again, through is spelled THRU. All right.
Yes, that's correct. There's also a Facebook page, but we definitely get a lot more engagement on the Twitter site.
Okay. Yeah, I'll leave both in the show notes so people can link to that. Well, thank you again, Paisley, for your time.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me.
Auf Wiedersehen.
Okay. Tschüss.
Tschüss.
Ciao.